We're going to kick off the afternoon with an incredible keynote from Sucharia Mulperu, who many of you know, who is a real rock star in this space. She is the lead analyst from Forrester on e-commerce and has some incredible research to show you guys on what is coming in 2014, what's hot and what's not.
One of the things that we often get asked at Forrester is our numbers, and I know that Accenture showed some numbers. Hopefully, they didn't overlap with what I'm about to show you. We do a lot of e-commerce forecasting, and this is some high-level data about e-com around the world. Our last full-year forecast that we completed was 2012. We're just closing the books on 2013, so that should come out shortly. But basically, the net here of this slide is that e-com now is about a $500 billion industry around the world, expected to be about $1 trillion by 2017, which should be about 3% of the world's GDP. Now, interestingly, in 2017, two markets are going to have the lion's share of that. It's the US, of course, which should approach a $400 billion number, and China, which is expected to be about $600 billion in e-com by then. Now, that does include peer-to-peer commerce, and there's really one company, Alibaba, that is the bulk of that. But it is interesting to see the trajectory of a number of these markets. Europe is another couple of $100 billion, and then we have a relatively small but growing base in Latin America. Latin America and South America is actually the fastest growing of all of the regions. Now, 2013, of course, is a question that we all naturally have, and every year, Forrester with Shop.org pulls together our State of Retail Online, the State of Retailing Online report, and in that we survey, anywhere from 50 to 100 retailers and get some pretty detailed responses from them. And of all of the retailers that responded this past year, this was actually a survey that we did in November, the annual year-over-year growth rate was about 29%. So that's obviously very, very strong and speaks to the share shift that's happening and continues to happen from the store to the web channel. Now, when we actually pull our 2013 forecast numbers together, what you're going to see is that those numbers are going to be a little bit smaller because there is some dissonance between what retailers, many of whom are very successful and large, what they're seeing versus what the consumer is reporting. So when those numbers end up being, say, like 15% year-over-year growth, which is likely what the number is going to be, that is typically the reason for that delta. But what I will also say is that a lot of the other columns here, the breakouts, are the subsectors of the type of retailers that we surveyed by the size of their web business, their tenure online, and the type of retailer that they are, the channel that they dominate, whether it's a store primarily or whether it's an online pure play. And really the biggest growth rates being from the small retailers and those retailers that are relatively young. Now, all of those good things about e-com aside, there are some choppy waters ahead, even though e-com and retail, the retailers in the online commerce industry have done a pretty good job navigating the seas so far. There are challenges ahead. And I'm going to start with those myths and truths that we promised. And I'm going to start, I have about 7 to share with you. And we will start with the first truth. And that is that the biggest threat to most e-com retailers is not Amazon. It's actually the Postal Service. And here is the reason why. The single biggest Achilles heel of the entire e-commerce industry is free shipping. And shipping and the subsidization of shipping is something that is not only expected, but it is also expected to be subsidized by retailers. This is data that I collect almost annually, for the last few years annually, with BizRate Insights. And BizRate Insights does post-transaction surveys with consumers, and during this past holiday season, we did surveys with thousands and thousands of consumers who had purchased on e-com websites, and one of the questions that we asked is when they completed transactions, how many of them actually took advantage of a free shipping offer. As you can see, that number has hovered around 50% virtually the entire holiday season. And in fact, the number of consumers, the percent of consumers who are taking advantage of free shipping with no threshold offers is actually increasing. And that isn't always a great thing for retailers because it is very expensive. Now, you may also have seen this data point, which speaks to the condition of our postal service. In 2014, this is by their own estimates, they expect to lose about $15 billion. That figure should grow to a loss of $21 billion by 2016. Now, what happens next with our postal service isn't a big shock because literally this scenario has played itself out in nearly a dozen different markets that have faced the same exact scenario of declining mail volume while also being challenged with trying to meet some of their pension obligations and other costs that they have to contend with. And typically it's one of two things that happen. The first is cost reduction, and that, of course, is already in motion to the degree that it can be. The Postal Service has certainly already given out early retirement packages to the degree that they can. They're trying to share retail with other stores. In some rural areas, you'll have village stations that are co-located with convenience stores and post offices. You have but other challenges in other arenas, like for instance, there have been attempts to co-locate Postal Service facilities in Staples stores, and the Postal Workers Union has resisted that. It's unlikely that we'll get very much in the way of clustered delivery boxes, which are happening in Canada now. Is really interesting. If you have not followed the Canadian story, it's a little bit of a controversy because they're basically cutting out delivery to a lot of the urban areas, and big uproar on, well, what happens to people who can't get to their their clustered box? And then, you know, the government is saying, well, you can just basically get more exercise by you know, walking to your delivery box, and that's why it should be a good thing. I can't see that going over really well in the U.S., so that's probably not going to be a likely scenario. And then you've all followed the delivery day drama, where the attempts to move delivery down to 5 days have been met with resistance. There are bills back in Congress to try to get it down to 5 days again, but that's TBD and hasn't really come to a reality yet. So that leaves us to the other outcome, which is price increases. And there are three places where the Postal Service can increase its prices because there are three places where they make money. First is first-class mail, and that's envelope mail. And it is incredibly inelastic. It'd be a great place to raise money, except for the fact that there are limits on how much you can raise stamp prices. And even if we get up to 50 cents a stamp, that'll only still gain us maybe a few $1 billion. And remember, the number we're trying to make up is 15 billion. Business delivery, which is catalogs and magazines, many of you are already in that business, know just how elastic that is, which is incredibly elastic because the minute that the ROI on those programs decreases, you're going to switch to other more lucrative channels. And it's not that profitable to begin with for exactly that reason, is that there are substitutes and alternates, which leaves us to parcel delivery, which is where e-com really lives. Because it is growing, it too is incredibly inelastic, and it's also very, very profitable for the Postal Service. So that was why e-com is in such a vulnerable position to the postal rate increases. My estimate is that there are about 3 billion packages that were sent out in 2012, of which the Postal Service had about a third of it, and that also includes SmartPost and SurePost volume, which is FedEx and UPS outsourcing the last mile to the Postal Service. So that's a big chunk of their revenue, and that poses a nice little revenue lift for them to try to bridge that $15 billion gap. One thing that I often hear is that, well, they're the regional carriers that can keep them in check, and I just want to point out that I think that a lot of the regional carriers that we see are very, very challenged by scale. You know, if you ever follow the carrier message boards on Amazon, for instance, all of the complaints are about out, like Laser Ship and OnTrack, that have very, very significant challenges with trackability and actually getting their products to shoppers on time. And what I will say is the savior in all of this, and this is really where, one of the opportunities with omni-channel is the opportunity that the store has to take advantage of in-store pickup and ship to store and ship from store programs to actually make and mitigate some of the effect of these postal rate increases. The fact and the truth of the matter is that delivery to a commercial address is significantly cheaper than delivery to a residential address. And if retailers can divert packages that would otherwise go to residential addresses to commercial addresses, that becomes a saving to the retailer. It becomes actually much more efficient for even the carriers to execute. And if we can incent consumers to go to stores, that's actually not a bad thing. So that's what one of the advantages of omnichannel that I think often does not get weighed into the ROI analysis. And that actually is a segue to the next point, which is we talked about the Postal Service. Let's talk about some of the other carriers now. Truth, too, is that the holidays are a big mess. And while the holidays have been incredibly lucrative for e-com, there are more customers that become first-time web shoppers during holiday season than any other time. This is, again, BizRate Insights data. Every year we ask people, are you shopping in stores less because you're shopping online? Do you prefer to shop online versus shopping in stores, especially during the crowds of Thanksgiving weekend? Huge agreement and just a positivity toward kind of online shopping during those key time frames. But what I want to point out is that there's a dirty little secret within e-com that is out there that I don't think that people fully understand, and this kind of is going toward kind of that UPS / carrier debacle that happened this past holiday season. But the truth is that peak volume is reaching unsustainable levels. And here is the math that kind of talks through it. And this is really, really important to understand because there is, I think, a vast misperception that it was just kind of the carriers mismanaging their entire holiday season when in fact the numbers around what's happening weren't recognized. So e-com is about a $260 or so odd billion dollar market. During the months of November and December alone, e-commerce does about $80 billion. So a significant portion in a short period of time. 40% of that $80 billion, which is about $32 billion, happens during 17 days after Cyber Week and before December 25th. So a very, very short period of time. Where that math equates, because our average order values are lower during the holiday than in the rest of the year, average daily e-com package volume is about 7 million packages sent throughout the entire system within the United States. Your daily package volume during those 17 days is 46 million packages. That's almost a 7-fold increase on a daily basis. You throw in an ice storm in that picture, and that even complicates things further. Now, let's also look at the carriers. The maximum package volume at Worldport, which is Louisville, which is the UPS hub in Louisville, is about 4 million packages. The maximum capacity at the FedEx Express hub in Memphis is about 3.5 million packages. If you do the math, now they're not the only hubs. There are probably about 10 hubs total in the U.S., give or take. You can see why we hit that capacity number. Now, does it make sense to invest in more hubs for just those 14 or 17 days of the year? No, of course not. So this is basic supply and demand, where we have a lot of demand for very little supply. The outcome is going to be big price increases next holiday season, because what we saw was this as a result of those numbers on that previous slide. And some of that was fueled by like the nonsense on the bottom of the slide here, which is, kind of companies sending out emails on December 22nd in the midst of this craziness, promising free delivery and on-time delivery by December 24th, which was not even going to happen. I mean, they'd already committed all of their express volume at this point. So what they were doing is they were basically pushing all of the orders into the SurePost and the SmartPost system, saying that the SLAs are 2 to 7 days, and kind of we may get it to you on time, maybe not. So anyway, that's, I think, where we're going with shipping. And that, since we're talking about Amazon, let's actually get to the third truth here. Amazon wasn't the first biggest threat, but I do think it's the second biggest threat, because it is coming after everybody's business. It's coming after apparel, and I think that there are a lot of challenges that they have, but I think that the success that they have seen is in 3 subcategories. They see it in athletic shoes, they see it in denim and t-shirts, and those are all significantly big enough to make an impact on Amazon in the space. Obviously, getting into grocery with fresh and consumables, and Amazon Supply with B2B, which we talked about this morning. But unlike the last big disruption in retail, which was really Costco, where the major impact was really on grocery and CPG, Amazon's impact is everywhere. And just to give you a little bit of a sense of where some of these numbers are coming from and how important it is, my estimate of Amazon Prime's growth alone, this is, again, BizRate Insights data, where we asked people over the last few years, how many of you belong to a shipping club? And between 2012 and 2013, that number was a 50% growth number. The vast majority, I think like 98% of this number, is really Amazon Prime. And 2/3 of those people certainly spend more with Amazon as a result of that. Now, the little bit that's unspoken here is about half of those people who are quote unquote members are not people who have paid for their membership, but they're nonetheless getting the benefits of the program, and I think that that's important to keep in mind. And here's really the reason that it is so threatening to every other sector, which is that Amazon has the luxury of being a break-even business model and being rewarded by the market for it. If you've probably at some level seen most of this data, but it's basically their reported annual net income since the year 2000, and these numbers have been relatively modest. At best in 2004, it was 8%, and that kind of puts it on the level of maybe being as profitable as a UPS or a FedEx, but nowhere near as profitable as the other technology companies like a Google or a Facebook or even an eBay that it's often held in the same category as. So, so a lot of that is really, funds that are basically going into subsidizing the shipping programs that go with Amazon Prime and with all of our Super Saver shipping that we love. And my estimate is that their ability to continue to go after virtually every sector out there is going to continue insofar as they continue to have profit pools. I estimate that they probably have another 4 to 5 years of runway where they continue to make significant profit in areas like Marketplace or in advertising. So Marketplace, with all of its third-party sellers, that number has gradually been increasing as a percent of units sold. My estimate is that now they make about $4 billion a year from Marketplace. Most of that gets thrown back into subsidizing shipping. Advertising is a very, very fast-growing channel for them. This is a space that they've only recently started to play in, but their ability to take a big chunk out of the interactive marketing pie, I think, is rapidly growing. I can easily see a scenario where they become a $5 to $6 billion advertising juggernaut that then again, throws those profits back into shipping subsidies. The fourth truth is the change in pricing that this notion that EDLP dies, everyday low pricing goes away. One of and that also means, by the way, I think high-low pricing goes away too. There's in retail you have EDLP versus high-low as this everlasting debate of which pricing strategy is better. And I think that in this world of dynamic pricing, all of that dies. And from just a little bit of the data here, this is some of the data of how consumers use phones in physical stores. We know that about a third of consumers use phones to research prices in physical stores. They're actually using that to compare price. They're actually comparing prices in the course of that. Very, very few consumers find it difficult. They actually like it. It's easy. There are not too many challenges with it, and most importantly, a third of consumers, nearly 40%, actually say that they plan to research prices more on their phones in the future. At the same time, what we will hear often from retailers on the other side is that, well, there is a premium and there's an advantage to getting your products immediately, and for that reason, the store is still differentiated. So we actually asked consumers, how true is that? And while there is a small premium that consumers will pay in order to get the products in the store, that number is relatively small, single-digit lift, about 52% saying that they'd pay anywhere from 1 to 5% more for prices in the store. And those numbers, by the way, are certainly not enough to sustain the differences that we see here. There's a company that monitors prices called 360PI. It's a Canadian company that this past holiday season, they had pulled together some analysis of the prices on Amazon versus a whole bunch of other retailers. And on average, these are the differences in prices of how much lower Amazon's price was compared to the prices of all of these other retailers. So when you see on the right-hand side of the slide differentials of 30% or more, this is not sustainable. And these are the things that it really begs a question as to how does it continue to go? And when we look at how is it that Amazon is gaining market share in all of these different categories, this single-handedly, I think, answers the question, because it's not about just shipping. It's also about massive, massive price differentials that any rational customer who has a mobile phone is going to easily see that there is that variance. So what's a retailer to do? And I think a significant part of it rests in things like digital shelf tags and experiments. And companies like B&Q, which is a home goods retailer, sort of like Home Depot, but they're based in the UK. And they essentially created a program where you can download their mobile app and you get personalized pricing for yourself, when you scan the shelf tag. And it's sort of like a digital version of what dunnhumby is already doing with Tesco and Kroger, where basically it's cherry picking. It's doing what Amazon does, but instead of giving the best prices to everyone, they are cherry picking who gets better prices. And that is the idea being to drive lifetime value and loyalty from those customers. So I'm going to transition from the truths and go to myths. And here are some of the things that I think stand to have a little bit of demystification around them. And the first is about mobile. And I do want to put a disclaimer around this, because at Forrester, we have a ton of research around mobile. A few of my colleagues are actually about to publish a book on mobile, and one could talk for hours and hours and hours about mobile. We had a wonderful panel earlier about mobile, but I'm going to summarize it just to a couple of slides, because I think that with respect to retail, the one thing that I hear is the belief that, oh my goodness, everybody's investing in mobile. And I think that when you dig into the numbers and you see what the challenges are, the truth is a little bit different from that perception. This is data that we'd collected from about 150 e-business professionals who are responsible for mobile initiatives at their companies. And as you can see, the percent of people that are actually investing, or the percent of companies that have more than $1 million invested in mobile in any given year, is actually pretty small. And a significant portion of them, these are 1B plus companies, aren't even investing $250,000 in mobile. So the amount that's actually going into it is there's big bifurcation in those companies that are investing significant amounts and those companies that are not investing that much at all. And those investment levels are happening in spite of, or I should say are not happening, in spite of the data here. This is, again, the State of Retailing Online data, where we asked retailers what was their breakout of overall revenue allocation. And when kind of asked where they were seeing their revenues coming from, on average, what we see is about 21% coming from mobile, with the split being primarily tablet, 13% coming from tablet, and 8% coming from smartphones. So you still see these revenue dollars coming in spite of the fact that retailers aren't even investing a lot in the channel. They're doing some mild website optimization. They may have an app that has basically mimicked the performance of the site itself, but not really much in the way of a very unique strategy. And unlike what you know kind of is the general consensus, which is often that, oh, these are people who don't get mobile, I'd actually argue that it's actually a very rational response to be more conservative with respect to a mobile strategy. And it has a lot to do with what I thought was this great framework about first mover advantage that was featured in a Harvard Business Review article back in 2005. And if you have two axes, one of the speed of evolution of a technology, and on the other, the speed of how a consumer market evolves, the only time that it is absolutely a win-win-win to be a first mover is when the technology doesn't change. And there is nothing about the technology not changing that's true about mobile. So the idea of, kind of being a holdout, waiting, and observing and being more conservative in your spend, I don't think is something that is all that is that crazy, or is one that shouldn't be more broadly adopted. Now, that said, we do know that there are some early winners in mobile, and there are definitely opportunities and scenarios that make a lot of sense, that consumers are adopting, that are likely to be the ones that are going to be the predominant methods of how consumers adopt mobile devices. Like Uber is a great example of that. It's the ability to have a marketplace that is able to connect services. When we look in the drugstore space or in the quick service restaurant space, similar ideas where, as Dustin referred to this morning about prescription drug refills being an enormous utility both for the shopper as well as for the retailer itself, because the opportunity to make the transaction smoother, the opportunity to not have labor force involved in that, the opportunity to make that a more efficient transaction is hugely beneficial. The same applies to categories like quick service restaurants and pizza, where all of those same benefits and advantages of reducing costs, improving customer service, and creating efficiency can be incredibly valuable and utilitarian. Now, that said, what I will say is that the challenge is that what retailers have done, and part of the reason that those investment numbers are still relatively low, is that they have simply decided to invest in responsive design. And until there is more of a shakeout in the variability of how they can make their investments, that is likely to be the approach. And there are challenges. I mean, I'm not always the biggest proponent of responsive design, because I think that there are a lot of ways to execute it poorly, and there are a lot of really bad site experiences that can come, especially if it's not done well. But it is probably the best bang for the buck for retailers that don't have infinite resources. Another area that I think is important to keep in mind is that very few retailers have seen a ton of utility and value out of mobile payments. The whole digital wallet phenomenon is one that hasn't yet taken off in a major way, and it is not yet clear if we have any great catalyst that is going to change things. Maybe Apple will. I mean, they're probably in the best position to do it, but whether or not they will and when that happens remains to be seen. And the last point is, with very few exceptions, for most retailers, and most large retailers do have apps, their app usage is generally pretty small from a download standpoint, from a utility standpoint, except for their most loyal customers. And what that means is that all of the talk about beacons, while promising, is still probably very early and probably a few years away from any mass adoption. The second big myth that I do want to spend a few minutes talking about is big data, and I think that the myth here is the notion that big data is going to be your big savior. And you've probably seen some iteration of this data before. I think I've seen it at least from 3 or 4 Google presentations. But basically the idea being that we've gone from very little storage to kind of in 2002 having this inflection point where we have 280 exabytes of data available somewhere on the cloud, and that is an enormous. It's like, I think each exabyte is like 1 billion gigabytes, right, or something like that. It's very, very large. Anyway, the challenge, though, that I think is really the important piece is that finding those valuable insights isn't so easy. And these are just a few of the little examples that I see that I think are just really, really important in pointing out some of the other side of the equation. I mean, one is it was a piece that was published by James Glantz in the New York Times, which basically said, if big data was this massive, massive change in our world on par with the Industrial Revolution, why is our productivity data not better? Because he actually showed like a chart showing that the productivity actually went down as a country in the same period of time that all this data was exploding. Netflix, which I think is a great example of a company that often gets a lot of credit for data and how well they mine their algorithms to be able to create predictive formulas, not even counting the Netflix prize, which I think is a great example of how hard it is to optimize data. But this was a piece that didn't really get a lot of attention, but I think was really, really interesting that they now have a whole group of human beings that manually categorize every single movie. So much for data being able to magically determine that. And my favorite example is this story of long-term capital management. I don't know if how many of you have actually followed that, but it was a hedge fund many years ago, which was supposed to have been this amazing compendium of algorithms that were supposed to make tons and tons of money for its founders. Within the founding group, there was a Nobel Prize winner who was the creator of the Black-Scholes formula, and basically they went bankrupt, and they had to be bailed out by the government. So much for kind of big data and having enormous algorithms being able to drive tremendous value. Now, I'm not a complete Luddite, I think, when it comes to data. What I do want to say, though, is that within retail, one of the important pieces to keep in mind is that a lot of the data solutions that have driven value are solutions that are already in practice and are already being broadly used by retailers. And my argument is that there are not a lot of new unfounded solutions out there within the data realm that are going to add tons and tons of incrementality to drive enormous value. And this is at a high level of framework that we have at Forrester called our Tech Radar, where we map different technologies from birth to death, and then we assign different values. And as you can see, when we look at the bottom for where the highest value data applications really are, some of the most valuable ones are things like markdown optimization or email personalization, things that as an industry we've been doing and we've been maturing for many, many years. My favorite is actually RFM analysis, recency, frequency, and monetary value. There are a number of marketers that say that nothing trumps RFM from a predictive standpoint to this day. There is no better predictor of what drives future success than understanding that bit of information about your current customer base. Now, there are some other elements that are in the birth cycle, I'll say. They haven't been broadly adopted, but they're still high. And I'll give you an example of where they are. Things like session monitoring. Session monitoring is awesome. It's like the ability to basically track an individual session during the course of a transaction. And a company that really does that would be an example like Tea Leaf. Now, the challenge with a company like Tea Leaf is that it too has been around for 10 years, more than 10 years, but it hasn't been broadly adopted for a few reasons. In its earlier cycle, the price points were too high, and then in its later cycle, it was acquired by IBM, and when you get acquired by a large company, the ability to grow at that point, for all intents and purposes, goes away. So the opportunities here that I see within big data are pretty limited. And then when you have a lot of the places where there are other opportunities like social monitoring or sentiment analysis, for the most part, the value has been more questionable. Big data, I think, has a really big moment of truth right now with respect to the Target data breach. If they can't figure out what has happened, if companies can't figure out what happened here, I think that really calls into question a lot of that value. So third, because I only have a minute left, and I really wanted to talk about Bitcoin too, but I think that we're going to have to probably go through this quickly. My third myth is that Bitcoin is the bomb, and I think that. I think the use of the article is really important. Bitcoin could be a bomb, but I don't think it's the bomb. We've seen all of the media articles about that. I think that a significant part of it is largely due to the fact that not a lot of people even really understand it. We see a lot of retailers now recently, at least a few. We've seen Tiger Direct, Overstock, Fancy, there are probably others, that have decided to put Bitcoin as a mark on their payment page. And the question is, well, why may that be happening? And I really don't have a great answer other than the fact they probably want to get some degree of PR from it. I think that there are a lot of things that are important to keep in mind about Bitcoin. I actually see it as a technology that is more like a TiVo or a Napster. Yes, it is revolutionary in that it now gives us the opportunity to anonymize payments between companies, but whether or not they're going to ultimately be the format and the standard by which it's actually executed, I would argue that's companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, which already had credits, which was essentially an early version of Bitcoin, are in equally as good of a position to take advantage of it. I don't want to go through all of the bullets here, but what I'll basically say is I think that the value proposition to customers with respect to a technology like this is still not clear. The truth is that most of us, according to all of the data that we have at Forrester, still very much trust our financial institutions. We like our financial institutions because in the event that there is some hacking, an event that we lose our money, our financial institutions usually have our back. And if that were to happen with Bitcoin, nobody's got your back, and it's like losing cash. So that, I think, poses a significant challenge to whether or not there is going to be broad adoption. Not to mention that this is essentially like creating new money, and it's okay at small scale. It may become illegal at large scale. There's a great quote by Robert Shiller, the economist. He basically said, I think at the World Economic Forum last week, he said that Bitcoin as a monetary system is a disaster. As a promotional vehicle, it's brilliant. So I'm just going to summarize. Here are where I'm bullish is omni-channel investments in investments in areas like in-store pickup, Amazon Prime, dynamic pricing, responsive design. And I do like the idea of seamless digital low-cost money transfers, but on the bear side, I think shipping rates are going up. Anyone competing with Amazon is in trouble. You need to have the most big data solutions for retail. I'm not super bearish on Bitcoin, and we didn't talk about same-day delivery, but that's a silly idea too. So if you do want to email me about the presentation or have any questions or follow me on Twitter, that's my information. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
I was, as I'm sure many people in the room were, I was really surprised about the investment that companies are making in mobile. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to that, what kind of research you did to figure that out, and also how you define investment in mobile? Is it talent? Is it technology? Is it marketing? How do you define that?
Yeah, it was, we have a panel of companies that we send the survey to, and we give them, the opportunity to select where your investment levels are. Usually they are people who are responsible for mobile or some type of an e-business strategy, and we ask them, what did they spend? And I believe that the question defined your total mobile investment, which includes technology, any proprietary talent, any third-party vendors or partners that you're using, et cetera. Yep. Anything else? Okay. There's a huge delta between what consumers are willing to pay and what it costs. And the truth is that it costs about $10 to $20 to deliver a package same day. And for the most part right now, the most expensive, even with like an eBay now, you're seeing about $7 of that maybe being passed on to the shopper. So there is a big delta between that $7 and that $20. And who's going to pick up the difference? Right now, it's Silicon Valley. It's eBay, it's Google, or it's Seattle, it's Amazon. But in terms of retailers being able to fill that gap, that's a big difference. The other is that retailers still don't have a great handle on what's in inventory in the store, and that's a really, really big hurdle and obstacle to getting same-day delivery right. You end up with a huge cancel rates, you have to substitute a lot. Same-day delivery, actually FedEx is piloting this and is finding, I think, that other industries outside of retail is where the power is, because that's where the willingness to pay up to $20 makes sense. It's essentially B2B courier services, can be in medical services or businesses that are willing to do that, not necessarily consumers. Anything else? Yes. Probably Amazon with if they get into auto. They are in a unique sector. Because what he's saying is that auto is one unit. They have these regional DCs where they can basically get any auto parts supplier, a significant portion of parts that you may need for your car. Not everything, but a lot of them. And could you take advantage of that? I think that the big difference in auto is that they have a distribution center and they have a warehouse management system so that they know where all of those items are. I often get asked this question about pizza too. Why is it that Domino's can do this, and why is it so hard for everyone else? I think there are 4 factors that make it effective for Domino's. One is that the stores are really small, so it's 1,000 square feet probably that you're picking from. 2 is that there are probably 100 items in that store, so that also makes it really easy to pick from. 3 is that their delivery zones are very confined, so it's no more than like 5 square miles or a 5-mile radius that you're driving, sometimes even smaller than that. That makes that, kind of that fast delivery time a lot easier. The 4th is that it's a tip-based model. So you can, maybe pay not as much to the driver, but, you're essentially asking the customer to subsidize that delivery. So if we can get those 4 factors to come together in retail, I think you've got a same-day delivery model. I see very, very few retailers that have the confluence of all 4. So. Okay, thank you.